knees like buckle and give out and I pass out up here, it's probably because I'm still thinking about that. All right. So we've been talking about the armor of God. So who can remember what we talked about last week? Anyone? What did we talk about? What topic on the armor of God did we talk about last week? See who was paying attention. Theo. The what of truth?
The belt of truth.
The belt of truth. And so what's the importance of the belt of truth? Yep. So it did we lose it? Between truth and a lie. Right? Concept of right versus wrong. So before we jump into the lesson on that point, I just want to say, without God, or pose a question, like without God, what's your basis for morality? Is there any basis or foundation for morality without God? Anyone at all? Where do we get truth from? If God doesn't exist, where do we get truth from? Yourself, right? You form your own opinions. If God is part of your life, your truth is determined by His Word, right? So that's a whole concept. I feel like I kind of have to mention it based on what we're going to talk about tonight. But that's something that we touch on later at a later. Today, the topic that we're going to discuss is about defending your faith, and we're going to talk about biblical accuracy and then the life of Jesus, if Jesus really existed. Have those questions ever came into your mind? Is Jesus real? You guys think about when you're a little kid and you guys talk about, I hope I'm not spoiling anything for anyone in here, Santa's not real, guys. I'm sorry. I knew there were going to be a few of you guys. I knew it. I just ruined this year for you. I'm sorry. So you guys think about when you were younger and you learned that Santa, the Easter Bunny's not real and the Tooth Fairy's not real. Sorry, guys. If you're getting $50 for every tooth, that's your parents' earmuffs, all right? No. Absolutely not. And hold on. Shh. Listen up. So when you were younger, after hearing those things, did that ever put into question the life of Jesus or the person of Jesus Christ? So I'm going to repeat that now since everybody's quiet. Did that ever put into question whether the existence of Jesus is actually true? Show of hands. Did anyone think that? Don't feel shame thinking that. All right, so go ahead and go to the next slide here. So we're going to start with biblical accuracy here. Has anyone ever had a conversation with somebody about the Bible and its credibility or accuracy? Like whether the claims in the Bible, the things that are stated in the Bible, are actually true or not? Or have you ever had a question yourself about if some of the stories in the Bible are actually true? Jonah being swallowed by a fish. Does that ever come into your mind and like, did that really happen? If I would have said that, I'd be off. So I'll just go ahead and say there's definitely things in the Bible that raise a question mark for us sometimes. Another topic, I'm going to kind of go off on a side note here as well before we get into this. But if we believe that God exists and He created this universe, right? Genesis 1:1, if we believe that, is it really so far-fetched that all these other stories and all these situations and scenarios have happened? It's not really. So back to this. Have any of these things, so the Bible being written by men, there are errors in the Bible, there are things left out of the Bible, there were Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that. and then the Bible's been corrupted over time through the translation. Has anybody ever heard that at school or from somebody else in your life? Does anyone care to share the situation? Or like, what did you say? Did you have an opportunity to say anything about it? Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So did it cause anyone to completely question their faith? Yeah. So when I was a junior in high school and senior, I did post-secondary, so I was taking college classes, and I remember taking a sociology course, and the sociology professor was like a staunch atheist, and he was just trying to rip the Bible apart and talk about the errors and several different things in the books of Genesis and Exodus both. And I just remember kind of feeling almost like shame, right? Like that I didn't have the knowledge to be able to refute what he was saying, right? And there may always be a time in our lives when we may not have that knowledge. Some situation or scenario, conversation might come up, and you may not always have the knowledge at that time. But if there ever has been a situation like this, and once we dig into these statements here, hopefully this will at least equip you guys to be able to answer some of these questions here and give you guys more confidence and ground you in your faith. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to provide answers to these specific statements here. So I want to look at Romans 10:17 real quick and read that, and then we're going to come back to this later as well. So it says, "So faith comes from what is heard, and what is heard comes from the message about Christ." So what if someone doesn't have faith? What if they're presented with the gospel and they don't respond? They say no to God. They walk out. What happens to that person? What does the Bible say? Their heart is what? It's hardened, right? So how can we reach that person? Those people who aren't believing in faith, how can we appeal to them? What kind of conversations can we have with them to be able to try to get an in, to be able to share that message again? It's going to be the stuff that we're talking about today. We have to appeal to their logic, okay? So when we're talking about things like creation, is it logical to think just from the human mind that something came from nothing? Has anybody ever witnessed that? That's never been witnessed, right? We talk about scrutiny of several different things using the scientific method, but that's never been evaluated. So think about a painting or this. Did that just come into existence, or did somebody make that? That's evidence that somebody made that. Nobody in here is going to believe that that just came from nothing, this sign, right? Everybody is going to think somebody created the graphic file and somebody made that for us. What about this building? Did it build itself? Or is it evidence that there was an architect and a builder? So if we look at creation, it's logical to think that there is a God and that someone had to create this world. So then I want to also look at Romans 1:20 here as well. Romans 1:20 it says, "From the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what he has made, and as a result, people are without excuse." Going to go to the next slide. So I wanted to bring up these verses here and kind of see, what does Scripture say about those statements that were on that previous slide? So if we look at this first verse, 2 Timothy, and the 2 Peter verse, both of them talk about all Scripture being inspired of God, right? So God, we've heard this before, God has breathed in to these men that wrote the Bible the words that he wants. Right? And then if we look at Psalm 6:7, David pens, he says, the words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. Thou shalt keep them, O Lord, thou shalt preserve them from this generation forever. Does anybody ever, that's like a whole message. I think I've actually heard Pastor Snook talk about Psalms 12:6-7, and how silver is actually purified. Does anybody know that? How silver is actually purified? Do you know? Yeah. So what they do is they stick it in a forge, right? They heat it up to boiling point, and what actually happens is it separates the silver and the impurities. The impurities actually come to the top, and they take them off, right? And then they do that again. So David is saying that the words of God that are penned, this Bible that we have, is purified. The impurities are going to stay removed from it, and that he is going to preserve them from his generation through the end of time. All right, so go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so we want to talk about how the Bible was written, whether it came from original manuscripts or copies. Has anybody ever heard anything about this? You have last night, right? So what if I told you guys that we don't have any original, or we don't think we have any original manuscripts for the Bible? Does that seem bad? Does it? Who thinks it's bad that we don't have any original manuscripts from the Bible, that we only have copies? All right, so do we know what the language of the New Testament was written in? I want to establish a few things here. Correct, it was written in Greek. And then, so we're going to ask, like, do we have the evidence of preservation that David spoke of here? So I want to show a video here, if we can go ahead and pull that up. It's only 2 minutes.
How do you account for the errors of the scribes when the New Testament was handed down person to person?
Yeah, excellent question. There are errors that we know about. Why? Because we can compare the documents, we can compare the manuscripts and see where the errors are. In fact, let me see if I can show you a representation of that, because it's better seen than it is described.
Is the Bible that we have today accurate? This question has become increasingly popular due to writings from skeptics like Bart Ehrman, and you'll see how the student featured in this particular Q&A, Grace is her name, you'll see how her thinking about the reliability of the New Testament has been affected. But there's also a huge bomb that gets dropped during the answer in this Q&A that is extremely important. With that being said, let's dive in.
Let's say you have, here's the original, which we don't have. We don't, at least we don't think we have any original documents, okay? So they're all copies, okay? And let's say you find 4 different copies. And in the first copy, you see an error right here. And then another copy, there's another error right there. In the third copy, there's another error right there. And in the fourth copy, there's an error right there. Can you reconstruct the original?
Yes.
Yes. And that's what scholars do. The original, this happens to be Romans 3:26, God is just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Now the note here is the New Testament documents have far fewer variations than this example. So yes, sometimes scribe made mistakes, but in virtually all cases we know what the mistake was and we can correct it by comparing it with other documents. Now you might say, why wouldn't God just, if this is true, why wouldn't he just maintain the original? I'm speculating here, but I think one reason, well, 2 reasons. Number one, if we had the original, we might venerate it. We tend to venerate things like that, right? But number 2, if I had the original, what could I do to it? I could alter it, right? But if you had a copy, 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 and I had a copy, and I changed my copy, is everyone going to know who changed their copy? Yeah, because when you get all your copies together and compare it to mine, you go, Turek, you heretic, why'd you do that? Right? So by not preserving the original, you actually are...
How do you...
All right. So what he was trying to describe there, you can go back to the last slide for a second, was that copies actually help to preserve the text better than a single original copy. Okay? And we're going to dive in and we're going to actually look at how many copies we have of just the New Testament text here. So go ahead and go to that next slide. So what this shows, this is extraordinary, guys. If you don't remember anything else from this whole thing, remember this right here. So if you look on the left, it shows the author, and then the date written, earliest copy, approximate time span between the original, when we think it was written, and the copy, and then how many copies we actually have. So who's heard of Julius Caesar? Everybody has heard of Julius Caesar, right? They talk about Julius Caesar, the Gallic Wars, and his conquest. And we have how many copies about Julius Caesar? 10. Does anybody question if Julius Caesar was ever alive? No, they don't. If we look at the New Testament, we'll just jump right to it. The New Testament. What does that say? How many copies? 5,600. Guys, this is just of the New Testament. That's incredible. And if you look at the approximate time span between the original and the copy, it was actually less than 30 years. Okay? And not only that, but when they take these copies and these scholars look at all these copies side by side, there is 99.5% accuracy. Okay? So that was a very simple analogy or example that he was showing in that video. But you guys got the gist of what he was talking about. If something, the pen marks happened to be smudged, right? What if that happened on the original? Shoot, right? Trouble. So not only do we have 5,600 copies, but then that was translated, right? If you look at the bottom, it says it was translated in Syriac, Latin, Coptic, and Aramaic, and there were 19,000 additional copies. What this also does, it does on the bottom. It says total supporting New Testament manuscript base is over 24,000. That is accounting for the 5,600 plus the 19,000. If you look at the commentary and then the quotations by a lot of the Jewish rabbis, good at memorizing whole books of the Bible. Okay, and that guy he talked about, Bart Ehrman, there was a guy named Bruce Metzger who died a few years back. He was considered like the best, most reputable scholar within the last 100 years. And what he showed was that with those quotations alone, we could actually reproduce 5% the entirety of the New Testament. So pretty incredible. So go ahead and go to the next slide here. So I want to talk about conspiracies of corruption. So there's a very common theory of overzealous monks who corrupted the Bible. So first we're going to ask, is that possible? What would it take? So is it possible? If we have 30,000 different quotations, we have 19,000, 24,000 manuscripts. Who thinks they could gather all those and change them and put them back? Steal them, change them, make sure that you copy the ink work properly and put them back without anyone knowing. Does that seem plausible? It doesn't seem plausible at all, right? So I heard a guy named Vodi Bokum, he's a pastor, and he describes this. And so he talks about fulfilling 3 levels of conspiracy. So we're going to kind of go into this a little deeper. So the first is the manuscript conspiracy. So he said we have nearly 6,000, the 5,600 manuscripts. So they would have to, like I said, steal them, change them, not show their ink work, and put them back. The second level is that they would have to change not only the original copies, but then they would have to go and steal the 19,000 translations that were translated in Syriac, Coptic, and Latin, steal them, change them, not show their ink work, and then put them back. And then third, like I mentioned earlier, was about those 30,000 quotations. So all those things would have to be changed. They'd have to take the 6,000 manuscripts. They'd have to take all of the translations in Syriac, Coptic, and then they'd have to take all those quotations without anybody knowing, change them, not show their ink work, and put them back. That would take a whole lot of faith to believe that somebody could do that. All right, so go ahead and go to the next slide here. So then if we can determine that the Bible is reliable, it's credible, then that question becomes very easy. Okay? Is Jesus real? He certainly is. Go ahead and go to the next slide here. So I'm going to come back to that verse in Romans here and read it again. I'm going to start in verse 18. So it says, "For God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godlessness and unrighteousness of people, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth, since what can be known about God is evident among them, because God has shown it to them. From the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, that is, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what he has made, and as a result, people are without excuse." So then why do you think people are so resistant to the name of Jesus? Any thoughts on that? Yeah, 100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. So I had put in my notes selfishness and pride. And so I was going to expand on that, but Theo just did a great job of doing that. Thank you. That's awesome. So it makes us accountable, right? If Jesus is real, right? It makes us accountable. That whole question of morality, it's not determined by us. That's determined by God. Okay? So anything that we think, we need to take to the scriptures. If we don't know what's true, this right here is your manual, right? My father-in-law always said, this is your measuring stick. This is how you measure your life. If something in your life doesn't measure up to this, then you need to change your life. Okay? So I'm going to end here with a story. So I read this to my group actually during the kickoff here, but it's called The Tale of Two Wolves. It says, one evening an old Cherokee told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. He said, "My son, the battle is between two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" And the old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." Okay, so that is a lot like a verse in the Bible that talks about the things that we are to put off as a man or woman and that we are to put on when we have the Spirit of God inside of us. Okay? So if you are struggling with anything in life, think about what you are feeding. Is what you're feeding things that are going to fuel worldly desire? Or is your priority that of Jesus? So this is where we talk about these quiet times, your prayer life, your worship, the people that you hang around, your attitude on a daily basis. Okay? So let's go ahead and bow our heads.